The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
Liberty. Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty.
Liberty. Liberty.
Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
President Trump and the establishment media. It's a war. So who's winning? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com. The war between President Trump and the elite media took another turn for the worse this week. We will hear all the back and forth in just a moment. We'll bring in LibertyNation.com media affairs correspondent Jeff Charles to discuss the latest lunacy on the left, plus the de facto leader of the increasingly addled Never Trump Republicans seriously considers challenging Trump for the 2020 GOP nomination. And LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza jumps on board to discuss the sudden controversy over guns produced by 3D printers and the trial of one-time Trump associate Paul Manafort.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We start with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class on the events and issues of the day. President Trump's ongoing beatdown on the elite establishment media came into sharp focus this week when the so-called journalist Jim Acosta of CNN, who's making a living off grandstanding and testifying at those press briefings with Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, was treated rudely by Trump supporters at a rally for the president in Florida.
The White House has held only 3 briefings for the press this month and 8 total since the end of May. There is no other way to describe what the White House is doing these days. Well, top officials, including the president, are hiding from the press. And Wolf, just to give you a sense as to what's happening right now, you can hear there is a chorus of boos and other chants from this Trump crowd here in Tampa, Florida. They're saying things like CNN sucks, go home, and fake news. Wolf, obviously, all of those things are false.
Oh, yes, all those things are obviously false. So the next day, Acosta said those Trump supporters are essentially un-American.
Honestly, it felt like we weren't in America anymore. I don't know how to put it any more plainly than that. Americans should not be treating their fellow Americans in this way. The president, during the campaign, referred to us as the dishonest media, the disgusting news media, liars, scum, and thieves, and so on. And then he rolled that right into the Oval Office and started calling us fake news and the enemy of the people. He is whipping these crowds up into a frenzy to the point where they really want to come after us.
But Acosta was just getting warmed up. He went to the press briefing at the White House, pulled another of his grandstanding ploys about Trump calling the media the enemy of the people, and got smacked down big time by Sarah Sanders.
You did not say that the press is not the enemy of the people. And I think it would be a good thing if you were to say right here at this briefing that the press are not the enemy of the people. I think we deserve that. But
it's ironic, Jim, repeatedly, the media resorts to personal attacks without any content other than to incite anger. The media has attacked me personally on a number of occasions, including your own network, said I should be harassed as a life sentence, that I should be choked. ICE officials are not welcomed in their place of worship, and personal information is shared on the internet. When I was hosted by the Correspondents Association, of which almost all of you are members of, you brought a comedian up to attack my appearance and call me a traitor to my own gender. In fact, fact, as far as I know, I'm the first press secretary in the history of the United States that's required Secret Service protection.
That was a wow response from Sarah Sanders. And, you know, Acosta and his biased colleagues in the elite media don't have a clue as to why these people hate them so much. No idea why they've been seething with resentment for years, which has only been made worse by the 90% negative coverage of Trump in the establishment legacy media. I mean, conservatives have been begging for years for someone, anyone, who will call out and take on the biased elite establishment media. And Donald Trump is, at last, that man. The last Republican president, George W. Bush, took a pounding from the leftist media, never responded, never fought back, never called them out, and watched as his approval numbers dropped through the floor into the 20s. And he became virtually irrelevant over the last couple years of his presidency. That will not happen with President Trump. He will answer every slight and call out every fake news story, and some which are not fake but are misleading, mostly through misleading headlines, which is all that many people read. Now, another of the most clueless of the anti-Trump sycophants on CNN is media analyst Brian Stelter.
I think what we are increasingly seeing from the president and his aides and his allies is a hate movement against the American press. When you look at the behavior around Jim Acosta and some of the other reporters at these rallies, President Trump is not just telling people to ignore the press or not believe the press. He's really telling people to hate journalists. And because he's holding rallies more and more often, we are seeing it more and more often. And that's why reporters like Acosta are saying this is worrisome. Someone might get hurt.
A hate movement. Leftists like Acosta accuse Trump supporters of a hate movement. So shall we revisit some of the statements made by high-profile leftists about Donald Trump?
With this kind of inspiration, I will go and take Trump out tonight.
Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president? It's been a while. And maybe it's time.
How dare he say the things he does? Of course I want to punch him in the face.
Right.
Yes. The press always asks me, don't I wish I were debating him? No, I wish you were in high school. I could take him behind the gym. That's what I wish.
Maxine Waters, Madonna, Johnny Depp, Robert De Niro, and esteemed former Vice President Joe Biden in a collage compiled by the Sean Hannity Show. No hate coming from that direction, but it's not just leftists. It's also never-Trumpers, Republicans and conservatives who have not only abandoned Trump, but attack him every day on TV. Among them, GOP establishment figure Nicole Wallace, now on MSNBC, who has decided to censor White House press briefings after hearing Sarah Sanders refusing to bow to Mr. Acosta.
You know, we're not going to air that anymore. Let's make that the last Sarah Huckabee Sanders clip ever aired at 4 o'clock. Yeah, that's it. You know what? That makes me sweat. That is vile.
Well, and the previous answer.
That made me sweat.
The previous answer
this
that we didn't.
This is someone who complains about a restaurant that exercises their First Amendment right to kick out someone that they think is obliterating democratic norms. I seriously, that made me sweat.
We'll talk a whole lot more about never-Trump Republicans like Nicole Wallace a bit later on when we discuss the de facto leader of the never-Trump movement seriously considering a challenge to the president for the GOP nomination in 2020.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel and get our Truth is Making a Comeback. America's Top Stories. With LN Editor-in-Chief Lisa K. Donner. An alternative to the leftist programs on TV. 5 facts. Just the facts, ma'am. Without the liberal bias. LN Radio, syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Listen to all the big names in politics with your host, Tim Donner. LNTV, The Right Analysis, with our Liberty Nation authors from across the globe. The Uprising Podcast, fun and entertaining commentary on what's really going on in the swamp with Scott Cosenza and Tim Donner. All this and more when you subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel today, because
Truth
is making
a comeback.
Up next, Lunacy on the Left with LibertyNation.com media affairs correspondent Jeff Charles.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, we have witnessed over the last 18 months, and really going back over 3 years to when he first rode that escalator at Trump Tower, an unprecedented, seething, almost sociopathic hatred for Donald Trump on the left. And just when we think they couldn't possibly get any worse, they get worse. And here to help us chronicle this week's lunacy on the left is LibertyNation.com media affairs correspondent Jeff Charles. Jeff, welcome. And the biggest blow-up on the left this week is about Sarah Zhang, a reporter hired by the New York Times with a years-long history of hateful anti-white rhetoric all over Twitter. And the Times' response to the people pointing out her flagrant racism is almost as curious as the fact they hired this bigot in the first place.
Yeah, that was a very interesting story, especially since the New York Times, as well as other leftist publications, love to engage in race baiting. But then they hire somebody who has a history of making racist comments against whites. And what I loved about this was the excuse that they used. Oh, she was just responding to white racists on Twitter. Yeah. Oh, this was just satire. No, come on now. There may have been some that were responses. The rest of it, this is just what I hear from people in the social justice movement all the time. She wasn't saying anything different. So, no, these came directly from her against white people, and it wasn't satire.
Well, I mean, if it was satire, it would be plainly labeled as satire. I mean, that's how we do it on LibertyNation.com and almost everywhere. When something is satire, it's labeled as satire so people know not to take it seriously. But, I mean, the whole idea that this was satirical really sort of pushes the envelope of credibility, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. I'll just come out and say it. It's a bold-faced lie. It wasn't satire. It's clearly not satire. You can usually, I mean, if you know satire, you can usually tell when somebody's being satirical. She's saying the exact same things that other social justice warriors say as well. To them, it's okay if you're racist as long as it's against white people. It's when it's against anybody else that it becomes a problem for them. If they're not European, it's okay to be racist. That's it.
Yeah, it is actually pretty simple, isn't it? Even if we don't have the names and numbers of all the players on the scorecard, because there's so many of them. But let's move on to one Cory Booker, the far-left senator from New Jersey, who went on what seemed like an unhinged rant against Trump and conservatives in advance of his likely presidential bid in 2020, sounding like he was imitating a preacher and implying that those who supported Brett Kavanaugh's appointment, to the Supreme Court are, quote, complicit in the evil.
You know, I don't know who does more good for the Republican Party, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Cory Booker. I mean, he just can't help himself. And what got me about that little sermon he was trying to preach is he was talking about how we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. We don't stay in the valley of the shadow of death. That's something that preachers usually say when they're talking about going through hard times, like financial struggles or relational struggles. No, for him, it's about Brett Kavanaugh. Like, he took a commonly used sermon and used it for political purposes, and it fell completely flat. I have no idea what goes on in this man's head.
Well, you're not alone, I would say that. It seems to me that Cory Booker fancies himself as the next Barack Obama, but he looks to me more like a dime store version of the 44th president. Now, you also wrote this week about perpetual victimhood on the left. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, perpetual victimhood. I mean, the piece was really about the impact of perpetual victimhood. And really, the left, many on the left think that they're doing minorities a favor by casting them as victims. But in reality, they're causing severe, really mental, psychological, and political problems for our country. In the end, you may feel like you're doing something good by quote-unquote fighting racism and fighting bigotry. But one, you're not really fighting either of those things, and you're just encouraging people to adopt a mindset that says, I am a victim and I cannot move forward because everybody is against me. It's a very, very, very dangerous mindset.
Now, before we let you go, I got to ask you, as an African American, and of course you don't like to be called that, you like to just be called a black American or an American. But black support for President Trump or black support for Republicans in this upcoming 2018 midterm elections, we've asked you periodically to gauge that for us. Where do you see the black community with regard to President Trump and the Republicans as we now approach the midterm elections?
You know, I'm actually shocked by it, but it's getting better. I don't want to be too optimistic, but we're seeing more and more black people either abandoning the left or completely going conservative. It's still happening slowly, but I just saw a poll. A Rasmussen poll showed that black support for President Trump was at 29%. This time last year, it was at 15%. So more and more black people, and not just black people, Hispanics as well, and even members of the LGBTQ plus community are kind of waking up and seeing that the Democrats don't really have their best interests at heart. We still have a long way to go, but it's a gradual shift, and it is happening. And it's encouraging.
Well, with the black unemployment rate lower than it's ever been since they started measuring it about 50 or 60 years ago, do you think, Jeff, that more and more black people are realizing that the best welfare program of all is a job?
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, I think most black people already know that, even the ones that are on welfare. It's just the way the welfare system is set up. It's harder for people to get off of it. So the idea is, I mean, most of them, if you offer them a job tomorrow that can cover everything that they need, they wouldn't stay on welfare. And I think that that's what's going to happen. We've already got, I can't remember the number, but tons of people off of food stamps now. If this trend continues, and more importantly, if we do not lose the House and the Senate, we can continue with a conservative agenda and continue to get more people back to work and more people off of government assistance. Black, white, Hispanic, whomever.
Any hope, Jeff, that the left might consider lowering the temperature a bit as we approach the elections, or are they going to turn that Bunsen burner up under Trump and turn the heat even higher? What do you think?
Oh, they're not going to calm down anytime soon. I think this strategy has worked so well for them over the past 10, 20 years. They don't see how it could not work. They don't see that it's backfiring on them. So I expect them to continue. Even if conservatives maintain Congress and retain Congress, they're still going to keep amping it up. Now, at some point, they're going to realize it. I just don't know when that's going to be.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate you joining us. Keep up your good work on LibertyNation.com.
Thank you very much for having me.
Jeff Charles, media affairs correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Up next, the de facto leader of the increasingly addled Never Trump Republicans considers challenging Trump for the 2020 GOP nomination.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, it all started when Donald Trump became a serious threat to win the Republican presidential nomination. That was when the Never Trump movement effectively commenced, attracting an informal coalition of establishment war hawks and right-leaning intellectuals and party hacks, appalled at the prospect of a crude vulgarian like Donald Trump seizing control of their party. Now, you might have thought those people would come to their senses once the choice was narrowed to Trump and Hillary Clinton, but you would be wrong. The anti-Trump venom from this narrow sliver of the right has continued almost unabated through the first 18 months of his presidency. Never mind that Trump denied the left their dream of a fundamentally transformed America, saved the Supreme Court from leftist control, and vanquished the Clinton dynasty once and for all. Never mind that he's pushed through the first serious tax reform in more than a generation and ordered massive deregulation, two items always at the top of the conservative agenda. Never mind that this president may well be on track to stabilize the Korean Peninsula, or that he forced NATO allies to raise the ante in their own defense, or that he's pushing the envelope hard on getting trade deals more favorable to America. Never mind that the economy is roaring and jobs abounding. No, none of that matters because Trump's style is repulsive to the calcified Republicans and conservatives who have looked this gift horse straight in the mouth. And it makes one believe that what these never-Trumpers have really wanted all along is not what they have claimed, the power to effect consequential change in a nation heading for socialism. No, their behavior suggests that all they want is to protect their brand from this déclassé interloper, even if it means turning the White House and the country over to the left. So while Trump is busy fulfilling all the bold campaign promises he made that got him elected, the never-Trumpers stand on the sidelines and gripe and moan and carry on about how crude he is, the skunk at their garden party. Thus, it should not be surprising that the de facto leader of the Never Trump movement, the one-time editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard, Bill Kristol, is reportedly well along in deciding to challenge President Trump for the 2020 presidential nomination of the GOP. Seriously. Now, rumors of his potential candidacy surfaced as early as March of this year when he attended a so-called must-show event for potential presidential contenders in New Hampshire. And going back a bit further, he provided the first hints of his candidacy when he told the New York Times in August of 2017 that, quote, "We need to take one shot at liberating the Republican Party from Trump and conservatism from Trumpism." Now, I'll provide just one soundbite of Mr. Kristol with his new best friends on MSNBC about how Trump is a stain on the presidency.
We've had a lot of demagogues, we've had a lot of liars, we've had a lot of irresponsible political leaders on both sides, honestly, over decades. We really haven't had one as president of the United States and one who, as president, is using his standing, his office, to just make things relentlessly to hammer away and make things worse.
Now, Kristol has not stopped at denouncing Trump every day and actively considering a run for president. In addition to regular appearances on MSNBC, where only anti-Trump Republicans are given airtime, he actually appeared this week on CNN, the home base for never-Trump Republicans, and offered advice for the Democrats on how to win the upcoming midterm election, saying they should play up the border separation issue. He said, quote, "Democrats, in my opinion, should keep the focus on these children, on the families. Our policy change the president ordered that was irresponsible and I think is, wrong, and then also incompetently executed. This is totally irresponsible and reckless governance by the president." So, of course, given that Kristol has become legendary around the D.C. swamp for his consistently wrong predictions and poor political judgment, we might only hope that the Democrats actually follow his advice. Now, you may recall that after Trump secured the GOP nomination in 2016, Kristol became a laughingstock when he promised to produce a serious challenger to Trump in the general election. But the only possible candidate who materialized was an obscure conservative writer named David French, who ultimately decided not to enter the race anyway. But now, Kristol has somehow convinced himself that Republicans will choose him over the 45th president. That may be even funnier than David French for president. Perhaps Mr. Kristol, who recently stated that Trump has brought out his own inner socialist, just thinks that simply by running for president, he'll be a hero to his fellow never-Trump travelers and, of course, the left. Certainly, he would receive all the political advice he needs from washed-up, radical, never-Trump GOP strategists like Anna Navarro and Steve Schmidt and Rick Wilson, whose acid-tongued denunciations of Trump on TV are just as unhinged as anyone on the left. But ultimately, folks, Mr. Kristol must be either delusional or masochistic or a primary victim of TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. Because when Trump is done with him, he will be shrunk into the size of a midget, if he isn't already, same as low-energy Jeb Bush, little Marco Rubio, lion Ted Cruz, crooked Hillary Clinton, and the other career politicians who've been ridiculed, pulverized, and dismissed from the stage by the bombastic billionaire. Now, it may sound ludicrous that a president enjoying near 90% approval from the voters in his own party, higher even than Ronald Reagan, would be challenged in a primary. But then, sanity has never been one of the hallmarks of the Never-Trump movement. Now, you need to know this, something that many people have forgotten, and that is that neoconservatives led by Mr. Kristol themselves seized control of the Republican Party from the traditional paleoconservatives at the turn of this century and severely degraded the GOP brand by convincing President George W. Bush to engage in the disastrous Iraq War. That gave us 8 years of Barack Obama. And now we're supposed to listen to these people when they effectively align themselves with the resistance by howling into the darkness about the horrors of Donald Trump as he fixes one long-festering problem after another. But as the ad says, wait, that's not all. It seems others are considering a challenge to Trump for the GOP nomination, including Never-Trump Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska, acclaimed author Brad Thor, and yes, even the loser in the 2012 presidential election, Mitt Romney. Heck, why not run George Will out there as well? The once respected conservative scold would certainly receive favorable coverage from his new BFFs on MSNBC and the left. And come to think of it, why not Jennifer Rubin, the insufferable, quote, conservative columnist for the Washington Post, whose voice and entire countenance is akin to fingernails on the chalkboard. There's been much talk of the almost sociopathic rage against Trump on the left, but at least leftists have sound ideological reasons for opposing this president. Not so with never-Trump Republicans and conservatives, whose thirst to wall off their party from the deplorables has unmasked them as nothing more than control freaks and ingrates enamored of their own vanishing importance.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel and get our Truth is Making a Comeback. America's Top Stories. With LN Editor-in-Chief Lisa K. Donner, an alternative to the leftist programs on TV. 5 facts. Just the facts, ma'am. Without the liberal bias. LN Radio, syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Listen to all the big names in politics with your host, Tim Donner. LN TV, the right analysis with our Liberty Nation authors from across the globe. The Uprising Podcast. Fun and entertaining commentary on what's really going on in the swamp with Scott Cosenza and Tim Donner. All this and more when you subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel today, because
Truth
is
making
come back.
LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza jumps on board to discuss the sudden controversy over guns produced by 3D printers and the trial of one-time Trump associate Paul Manafort.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it is time for us to welcome in our regular contributor, LibertyNation.com constitutional lawyer, legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hi, Tim.
So much going on this week, even though it's August, which is supposed to be a break in the action, but...
Blame air conditioning, Tim. All these people staying around the Capitol causing trouble instead of going home. Like
that's true. You know, in the days of when the swamp didn't have any air conditioning, everybody cleared out in August. And now the Senate's staying in session this month trying to secure the confirmation of many judges.
A postmortem on the republic that will surely include Carrier or whoever invented air conditioning.
I agree.
What's taking place?
It's actually one of the most underrated advances of modern civilization, but we'll get to that. First, Democrat judges and attorneys general stomp on free speech over 3D printing and guns. This has just exploded into the news this week.
This guy called Cody Wilson and his group called Defense Distributed created plans for 3D printers to be able to print in the 3D printer a certain part of a gun that is the registerable part to that gun. So legally speaking, that sort of is what makes it a firearm. And they were distributing that file over the internet, and the Department of the State under the Obama administration basically shut them down. They sued for their right to continue to post that. And they won. They won a settlement by the Department of State this past week. They got paid $40,000 for their legal fees, and they, as a marketing decision, were going to kind of launch it afresh on August the 1st and launch this file again as a popular hosting platform for the file. In advance of that, a number of Democrat attorneys general, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Maryland, New York, the usual suspects, Washington included, ran to court to say, oh, the sky's falling, we can't have people have this. Mm-hmm. And it's a great thing obviously for political purposes. That's why they did it. It seems to me to be clearly free speech, Tim. This is simply... It's like how to build a gun if it were a handbook. You couldn't restrict that, right, on, some kind of
right.
free,
It's a restriction of a flow of information.
That's all it is. This is a set of instructions that a person can use. And, by the way, just so people are clear, it is legal to build a gun for most people. Meaning if you're a felon, then I'm not talking to you. But if you're an adult and you're free from, you haven't been involuntarily committed, et cetera, it's usually legal federally for you to build your own gun for your own use.
We can't go into the whole 3D printing things, but it is a revolution. For a gun, though, a 3D printed gun can fire, as I understand, once, and that's it.
The printer prints the registerable part, which is why I went into that explanation. And then you buy all the other parts that aren't registered. You can buy them mail order. You can buy them, make them out of metal. So they are robust and can handle multiple shots. It's only that one part that need to be made out of plastic. Mm-hmm. And so for some guns, there are 3D printed guns that are the whole firearm. And that's what you're talking about, that are capable of a one round or maybe a couple rounds.
This is just a part. This is a key element.
But the thing that I think is kind of more revolutionary is you get this part made out of plastic that you could print at home, and then it just removes the government entirely from the process.
Now, if the government is to ban, government broadly speaking is to ban the passing or sharing of information about how to make a 3D gun, will they also remove from the internet or order removed from the internet instructions on how to build homemade bombs, for example? Because that's out there, too.
Or prosecute the people who do. Pennsylvania's Attorney General whose name it kills me that I can't remember right now in order to denigrate him, has come out with the fantastic idea that it is the same thing to give somebody a firearm as it is to give them 3D printed or not even give them, make available 3D printed plans for firearms that they can then access themselves. It's a shocking grant of censorious authority for that office, and it seems to me to be clearly violative of Pennsylvania's and the federal constitutional protections for free speech that we all enjoy.
Okay, big trial in Northern Virginia this week in the D.C. suburbs. The only person so far to go on trial on the basis of the Robert Mueller special investigation, Manafort for 3 months, the campaign manager for Donald Trump, but he is being prosecuted for financial crimes committed well before he had anything to do with Donald Trump. So the question arises, and I'm of two minds about this, because it appears to be a political prosecution, obviously, because Manafort was associated with Trump. But on the other hand, a special counsel, if he uncovers crimes in the midst of his investigation, can't simply ignore them, can he?
Yes, he can. He's running a triage operation. You know, there are many different behaviors that may be federal crimes, and he doesn't have to refer them all out. Now, it may be incumbent upon him in terms of good practices to do that, but I don't think that the matter is debatable about whether this is a political prosecution. It certainly is a political prosecution.
But what if he did actually commit the crimes of laundering money, refusing or failing to pay taxes, and, of course, they're making a big deal out of his lavish lifestyle as if that's a crime?
Tim, there was a Supreme Court case this session called Lozman versus Riviera Beach, if I have the caption correctly, and it discussed this man called Fane Lozman, who was challenging local government, and they arrested him for speaking out of turn at a city council meeting. Now, he says that his arrest was not because he was speaking out of turn, but because they were mad at him for him exposing what they had done previously. And that case made it up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was to rule on the question of whether or not the arrest would be legal even if there was probable cause. So previously the ruling was, well, if there was probable cause for the arrest, then the real motivations didn't matter. And the Supreme Court basically held that because of the particular fact pattern in this instance, that Mr. Lozman wins. But they didn't set down, and we talked about it, I believe, on this program, we talked about that they didn't set down a bright-line rule, which is what so many of us who are on the pro-liberty side of things were asking for, which is lay down a rule that the motivations of the officials do matter. If you ticket me for going 26 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone because I have a political bumper sticker that you don't like, that's not okay, and that should be seen as a free speech violation, even though I was actually doing 26.
Okay, Scott, a judge has ordered a Trump rally assault lawsuit to move forward. What's this one about?
This, Tim, goes towards the lawsuit for the San Jose Trump rally. If you remember, it was one of the ones that had sort of more violence than most, with vehement anti-Trump opponents placed outside the San Jose arena for the Trump rally. And what the plaintiffs in this lawsuit allege is that on purpose, the San Jose police funneled and directed the attendees at that rally to have to exit through a mob-like phalanx of virulent anti-Trump menacing folks who pelted them with eggs, with rocks, who beat them, and that they did it on purpose because of the political affiliation of those who attended the rally. And the city of San Jose argued before the court that even if that were true, it didn't matter, that the police officers had qualified immunity. They couldn't be sued. And the Ninth Circuit in this instance ruled, I think, correctly so. This qualified immunity is one of the banes of the existence of those of us that are wanting to keep officials from violating the rights of those of us who are not government officials. And in this case, the court says the suit can move forward and we'll get discovery, at least in some limited basis, and try to find out and root out whether that was true or not.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio, plus LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, are available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. That is it for this week, but we will be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.